Have you given up on masking fluid because it's messy? I want you to give it a second chance. With these hacks I'm about to share with you, you can apply masking fluid without the mess and get amazing results. Cleanup will be easy, you won't ruin your brushes, and you'll be able to mask fine lines and tiny details. Every time I share a tutorial with masking fluid, someone asks, can you make more tutorials without masking fluid? And I'm sorry, I can't. I believe masking fluid is one of the best tools for watercolor artists. Instead of painting without it, I'd rather show you how you can use masking fluid so you can get the most out of it too. People give up on masking fluid because it rips their paper, it ruins their brushes, it goes on sloppy and leaves blobs. I'm going to show you how to fix all of those problems. In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 best tools to apply masking fluid. I'll show you how to protect your brush, plus I'll reveal 2 other tools that are easier to clean and can do some things that brushes can't. If you want to get the most out of your masking fluid, you need all 3 of these tools. First, it's important to start with the right supplies. Use a good quality masking fluid. I will link to some of my favorites below. Whatever masking fluid you use, make sure it's fresh. Masking fluid can dry out or get goopy if it's old or the bottle wasn't sealed properly. If you haven't used your masking fluid in a while, it may have separated. Do not shake it. That will cause bubbles to form. Instead, gently swirl it or use a brush handle to stir it. Then check that it's a nice, smooth, liquid consistency. If it's not, if it's thick or it has chunks, then you need to get a new bottle of masking fluid. Again, links to my favorites are below. I always recommend testing your masking fluid on the same paper you plan to paint on. If you find the masking fluid is ripping your paper when you remove it, then it may not work with that paper. Like most things in watercolor, everything is better on 100% cotton watercolor paper. I've never had masking fluid rip high quality 100% cotton watercolor paper, even after leaving it on the paper for days. Now let's get into the tools for applying masking fluid. These are my 3 favorite tools. Before we get to those, don't forget to download my ebook, Masking Magic. It's a step-by-step guide for how to use masking fluid. It covers 7 masking fluid techniques with lots of photo examples. Get your copy of Masking Magic at the link below. First up is a round watercolor brush. It's the best tool for creating organic shapes and expressive brush strokes. Brushes are also comfortable and familiar to paint with. The only problem is masking fluid ruins brushes, unless you know how to take care of them, which we'll cover in a moment. An easier to clean alternative is silicone brushes, which I don't actually recommend. They don't behave like real brushes. They are clunky to use and don't make natural brush strokes. They don't hold any masking fluid, so you have to constantly dip them. You also should not use your good quality watercolor brushes. You cannot wash dried masking fluid out of a brush. Even with proper rinsing and cleaning, which I'll show you in a moment, masking fluid can build up in the brush and ruin it. So don't risk your good brushes. Instead, I use a set of inexpensive watercolor brushes to apply masking fluid. With that said, it's still worth taking care of your masking fluid brushes. I've been using these same brushes for the last 3 years. I prefer to use the smaller brushes the most. They're easier to keep clean and control where the masking fluid goes. You don't need any special cleaners or solvents to work with masking fluid. You only need soap. This is a repurposed food jar that I use for my masking fluid water. I add a drop of dish soap and fill it with water. Any dish soap will work, but I prefer to use clear, fragrance-free soap. Before dipping the brush in the masking fluid, rinse it in the soapy water. Then blot it dry on a paper towel. The soap will protect your bristles from the masking fluid. You can load a brush with masking fluid by dipping the tip of the brush into the masking fluid. Don't dip too far. You don't want masking fluid near the ferrule of the brush. Apply the masking fluid to your paper. You can paint with masking fluid on a brush just like you would with watercolor. Reload the brush with masking fluid as needed. Rinse your brush in the soapy water often. Every 2 to 3 times that you reload the brush, stop and rinse it in the soapy water to clean the masking fluid out of the brush. Blot it dry and then reload the masking fluid. Always dry the brush off before dipping back into the masking fluid. 2 things you don't want to add to your masking fluid are water or soap. Make sure your brush is nearly dry before picking up masking fluid. You can also pour a small amount of masking fluid in another container. Then you won't risk contaminating your larger bottle. You also won't have to worry about your bottle drying out. Most of the time, I work straight from the bottle and haven't had any issues with quality brands. When you're done applying masking fluid, rinse your brush in the soapy water. Make sure there is no masking fluid left in the brush. I don't do this every time, but occasionally I wash my masking fluid brushes with Master's brush cleaner. Like I said, I've been using these same brushes for years. As long as you're good about rinsing them in soapy water, they are pretty easy to maintain. If you want to create organic shapes and expressive strokes, there is no substitute for the brush. But even with the smallest brush, it's hard to mask fine details, small shapes, and straight uniform lines. That's why you need these next two tools. If brushes are high maintenance, then these next two tools are as low maintenance as it gets. If you want easy cleanup and precision, these are for you. This is a ruling pen. It's a drafting tool designed to create straight, uniform lines with ink. It's incredible for applying masking fluid. It's the best way to make straight, thin lines. I used a ruling pen to mask the grout lines for this pool tile. You can adjust the line thickness with this small dial on the side of the ruling pen. You can create really fine lines with this tool. But it's not just for creating straight lines. You can draw with a ruling pen just like a normal pen. I used it for the line work on these jellyfish. It's also great for outlining a complex shape that you want to mask. You can even use the ruling pen to fill in smaller areas. For larger areas, I use a brush. The ruling pen also holds a lot of masking fluid, so it's good for creating dots and mark making. I like the ruling pen better than masking fluid markers or fine tip applicators. With the ruling pen, there's no risk of blobs, you can adjust the line weight, and it's easy to clean. You can let the masking fluid dry on the ruling pen and then peel it off later. Sometimes the masking fluid starts to dry in the ruling pen while you're using it. It might get stringy or stop flowing. If that happens, you can wipe out or rinse out the masking fluid and refill the ruling pen. The only downside to the ruling pen is you can't get line variation or paint really fine details. But this next tool is great for creating expressive lines and tiny details with masking fluid. Before I tell you about it, I want to tell you a bit about my course, Creative Textures for Watercolor. In it, I teach 9 different masking fluid techniques to create unique patterns of white paper. The masking fluid lesson is a student favorite. If you want to learn more ways to use masking fluid and other ways to create watercolor textures, you can enroll now and start immediately. Look for the link below the video. The third tool I want to share with you is the dip pen. A dip pen has 2 parts, the nib and the holder. You can swap out the nib. There are many different types of nibs you can use. The nib I'm using is the Browse Blue Pumpkin. It has a very fine point. Like the ruling pen, it's very easy to clean. You can let the masking fluid dry on the nib and peel it off later. With a dip pen, you can draw expressive lines with variation. With light pressure, you can draw fine lines. If you press down on the nib, you can create a thicker line. You can also draw very fine lines and small marks. I love using a dip pen for mark making with masking fluid. The dip pen holds less masking fluid than the ruling pen and isn't good for filling in areas. The masking fluid also dries faster on the nib. If the masking fluid gets stringy or the flow stops, you need to clean the nib. You can wipe it off or rinse out the masking fluid and then reload the nib. If you're wondering if you need a ruling pen and/or a dip pen, you should know they're both useful far beyond masking fluid. You can use watercolor paint or ink in them as well. I used watercolor in the ruling pen to paint these straight fence lines. I used watercolor in a dip pen to paint the fine marks on the tops of these sand dollars. So, a well-rounded tool set for applying masking fluid includes a brush, a ruling pen, and a dip pen. With these 3 tools, you can apply masking fluid anywhere, even on the tiniest details. Check out my How to Use Masking Fluid playlist next. It has painting tutorials showing how to use each of of these masking fluid tools. For more masking fluid tips and tricks, download my free guide, Masking Magic. It has everything you need to get started with masking fluid. Plus, it covers 7 masking fluid techniques with lots of photo examples. You can download it at the link below.